The Holy Gospel according to Mark. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came out, and when he saw Jesus, fell at his feet and pleaded with him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So Jesus went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his cloak, I will be made well." Immediately, her flow of blood stopped. She felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my cloak?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" Jesus looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down beside him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the synagogue leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the synagogue leader, "Do not be afraid, only believe." Jesus allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, and the brother of James. When they came to the synagogue leader's house, Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl stood up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. Jesus strictly ordered no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Beloved people of God, I don't know about you, but today I am struck by the contrast between this absolutely glorious summer morning and the readings appointed for today. I mean, it is high summer, with light for almost 16 hours a day, and the landscape as lush and green as it could possibly be. And then this day. I know opinions differ on ideal summer temperatures, but I'll just say that for me, it doesn't get much better than this. Sunny, crystal clear air, low humidity, high in the mid-70s. I rode my bike here this morning and found it hard not to be overcome with sheer delight in the beauty of this day. And then, of course, it is also Pride weekend here in the Twin Cities, a time of such beautiful, colorful joy for so many. Happy Pride, all. And yet, right alongside these happy things that are all around us today, our readings appointed for this day point us in such a different direction. As I just said, it's quite a contrast. Today's first reading is from a book called Lamentations. And if you remember from what Josh, our lector, read, it's full of hard things. It includes talk of bearing a difficult yoke, of putting one's mouth to the dust. These ancient words even express a fear that the people have been rejected by God entirely. Given all of this, you might be surprised to learn that this is actually by far the most hopeful part of the book. Lamentations was written in the midst of the Babylonian exile, when Jerusalem had been destroyed, the people had been conquered and taken as prisoners into exile. The whole book is one long cry of lament. This, on such a beautiful, happy summer day. And then the psalm. Good try, by the way. The psalm today, Psalm 30, is a psalm of gratitude and praise, celebrating deliverance for the joy of some act of salvation. But it's clear that the psalm also presupposes a time of awful, even life-threatening danger. While there is now dancing and joy, there had been wailing and sackcloth, and there had been pleading with God. What profit is there in my blood if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you, O God, or declare your faithfulness? Hear, O Lord, and have mercy on me. O Lord, be my helper. Contained within this psalm is deep lamentation and a desperate plea for help. And then on this beautiful, happy summer morning, there's also today's gospel reading, which contains within it not one, but two stories of hardship, of lamentation, of desperation. It's really quite powerful the way it unfolds, with one story encompassed within the other. And both are heartbreaking. A father comes to Jesus and pleads with him, "My little daughter is at the point of death." And what desperation could be greater than that? A parent pleading for the life of their child. Jesus follows this man, and on his way, the story takes a turn. And as the crowds press on Jesus while he makes his way to this man's house, we learn of a woman in that crowd who is also desperate. She has been bleeding for 12 years. And here the spareness of the gospel writer Mark's language can only hint at all she must have suffered. Mark writes, "She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse." If you really take time to take that in, doesn't your heart just break? This poor woman, what desperation she must have known. And making things even worse, her condition also would have made her unclean to the people around, literally untouchable. No wonder she reaches out to Jesus, desperate for anything, for any help she might grasp onto. So again, it is a little jarring today, on this beautiful morning, in the midst of high summer. Here we have these appointed readings, which are hard, filled as they are with desperation and lamentation. However, that is life, is it not? That is reality, is it not? If we're ever paying attention, the world is always full of beauty and pain, of joy and lamentation. The two are never very far from each other, and our scriptures are always revealing to us that truth. And what I think is significant here is our scripture's invitation not to back away from this, but to embrace all of it. Perhaps especially the lamentation, the pain, our own, that of others, and of the wider world. The pain we might otherwise be quick to shut out or avoid. Our scripture's persistent claim is that God does not shut out or avoid the pain or the lamentation. And our God's invitation to us is to do the same. And I think it is especially powerful that this invitation into lamentation comes to us this day in particular through the lives, experiences, and bodies of women. In our own day and age, The bodies and experiences of women are still regularly discounted. But it's important to remember how profoundly patriarchal the society was in Jesus' day, even so much more so than ours. And in truth, it was probably even shocking to those first readers and hearers of the gospel that there were stories of Jesus interacting with women at all, let alone interacting with them in the ways we hear about today. In Jesus' gospel, Jesus drops what he's doing to go look after the life of a little girl. That in itself is not insignificant. While we know that in the ancient world, boys may have been prized, especially those firstborn boys who were primed to become heirs, the life of a little girl could easily be held to be of little or no account. Yet this father cares deeply, and Jesus responds. He goes. And then as he goes, we learn that Jesus is approached by a woman with a flow of blood. Jesus is approached by someone whose vulnerability as a woman could not be more clearly emphasized or on display. And in both of these cases, in which it was surely scandalous for him to do so, Jesus draws near. This woman touches Jesus, crossing a terrible taboo, and in the eyes of those around them, causing Jesus to become unclean. And what does Jesus do? He does not scold this woman, but blesses her. He extols her faith and tells her to go in peace. And then just after that, Jesus is told that the little girl, this one whom he was on his way to help, has died. Among Jesus' people, death was also taboo. The body of a corpse was not to be touched. It was ritually unclean. But Jesus goes anyway. And he goes right into the room where the little girl had died and takes her by the hand. We, in our day, are likely to think that the great shock of this story is that Jesus' words have power to bring this little girl back to life. However, I think that the first readers and hearers of this gospel would have been even more shocked that Jesus entered this place of death in the first place. More shocking were the taboos that he broke. More shocking was the fact that the ones Jesus chose to heal were these two on the very fringes of society. This bleeding woman, this little girl. Either one of these healings would have made for a shocking story all by itself, but here they are, powerfully intertwined. I also think it's powerful that today these stories come to us paired with a reading from Lamentations, this book that is itself one great cry of a whole people for help, for healing and restoration. And I am especially struck by this one thing, which in my mind at least ties all of these stories together. And that is the depths of God's compassion. Compassion, which is a word in Hebrew that is used twice in that reading from Lamentations. And as one commentator reminds us, in Hebrew, the word for compassion is derived from the word for womb. In fact, this commentator, Fred Niedner, writes that the two phrases about compassion in today's reading from Lamentations could and maybe even should be translated like this: God's womb never quits. And in the other, God's womb never exhausts itself. In other words, God's compassion is unending. God's womb embraces it all, and in deepest compassion brings healing and life. That's what we see happening in the depths of the exile, a people learning to trust that God's mercy never fails, that God's womb of compassion never quits. And that's what we see in these stories of Jesus too. Jesus here is an embodiment of God's womb-like compassion. And this compassion stops at nothing to embrace those excluded and bring healing, life, and joy, even amid the depths of suffering and pain. And in whatever small or large ways that are given to us in our lives, that is our calling too, to join in this work of God's compassion, this womb-like work of love and healing. Jesus calls us into it through our baptism, which is our own daily death and rebirth in the womb of God's compassionate love. These waters are birthing waters, and in them we find ourselves not only loved and claimed, but also reborn in deepest compassion, in this divine, womb-like love that never quits. Beloved ones, God's compassion holds all things. It holds our lamentation and our praise. It holds our joys, our sorrows, the joys and sorrows of all those around us, the joys and sorrows of all creation. All is held in the womb of God's love. And we are too. Amen.